I've now, as vice president, met over 150 world leaders, and they look to the United States to be a standard bearer.
Though many might see Katt Williams as nothing more than a comedian, whose run-ins with the laws have compromised his credibility, the man has been very outspoken in his criticism of some very popular figures, laying some key details that many have been inclined to agree with. Recently, he has made some revelations about Kamala Harris and how her chance at the presidency might not exactly be a good idea as many think. This sentiment has strong roots in her personal history, spreading from her roots to even her later relationships. But before we dive right into it, let's get a little picture of Katt Williams' personality. Katt Williams was born Micah Sierra Williams on September 2, 1971, in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he was brought up in a middle-class family in Dayton, Ohio. Since early childhood, Katt had been endowed with a genius mind along with a brilliant sense of humor leading to his venture into the comedic profession. Williams was also a bright student and continuously performed well in schools, and his intelligence was prominent in his early life. However, his rebellious nature alienated him from his parents at 13, and he moved out to Florida. Living on his own, he had to learn quickly how to become an adult and all the challenges of life that went with it. As a teenager, Williams honed his razor-sharp observation skills, and humor became a coping mechanism instead of an attempt to reconcile the difficulties that the streets presented. It was during his teenage years that he started looking at comedy as a profession. With his inborn knack for making people laugh and very sharp observations of society and life, Williams became a rising star at a tender age. Williams started building his comedic career in the mid-90s, doing a string of gigs in Cincinnati. His uniquely peculiar persona, replete with squeaky voice, boundless stage energy, and incisive social observations, was a welcome surprise for audiences. Relocating to Oakland, California, he began working out in the city's local scene and on some of its best stages, including the Comedy Store and the Improv. Much of his comedy was informed by many of his life experiences, often combining streetwise sensibilities with sharp, biting social observations. His astute humor quickly gained a solid audience base among general audiences and African Americans alike. As his popularity grew, he moved into larger and larger venues, eventually attaining his first television appearance on BET's Comic View alongside other up-and-coming black comedians. Since then, he has become a nationally famous performer from his appearance on Comic View, and he performed regularly on the circuit. He then reached even higher success when he played Money Mike in the 2002 film Friday After Next, and sealed his status as one of the hottest new stars on the comedy stage. His character as a sharp-talking pimp was hilarious and unforgettable, and he soon shot into mainstream popularity. By the mid-2000s, Williams was one of comedy's biggest stars. In 2006, he was given his first HBO special, Katt Williams, Live Let a Play, and the following year he struck gold with the even bigger hit, The Pimp Chronicles, PT1. These comedy specials really showcased his ability to blend humor with social critique through topics that touched on race, politics, and relationships, all done in that flamboyant style. Even with success, Williams several times managed to get his career derailed by legal problems through run-ins with the law. His most notable arrest was in November 2006 on charges that he carried a concealed firearm at Los Angeles International Airport. He pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 3 years probation and ordered to pay a fine. Over the next several years, Williams's legal woes only apparently continued to pile up. He was arrested several times on charges ranging from burglary to assault to child endangerment. In December 2012, Williams was arrested in Seattle following some problems in a bar where he allegedly threatened other patrons with a pool cue and threw a cigarette at a woman's face. Those were just among several incidents that year, including an arrest in Oakland following a high-speed chase with the police. Such legal issues started to shape the downfall of Williams's career. His erratic behavior, along with frequent arrests, made certain quarters question his health and mental stability. Through all this, Williams performed and entertained, but his stardom never reached the same heights it held in the mid-2000s. In all, the early life and career of Katt Williams shows his personal genius and struggle. From a simple stand-up comedian, he rose to become one of the leading figures in comedy during his prime. But serious legal problems and personal demons frequently overshadowed everything. Through all these struggles, however, Williams has remained an important and influential personality in the world of comedy, famous for his distinctive voice and unapologetic humor. Despite his issues, his take on popular figures has always been taken seriously, and his take on Kamala Harris is no different. Before we get into that, let's take a look at how it all began for Kamala Harris and her meteoric rise in politics. Kamala Harris was born on October 20, 1964, in Oakland, California, to two immigrant parents, both of whom would have huge influences on her life and career. Her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, originally from Chennai, India, was a researcher in breast cancer, while her father, Donald Harris, an economist, was of Jamaican origin. Each of their respective backgrounds and values brought into the upbringing of Harris a great sense of justice and public service, deeply connected with her cultural heritage. Her parents, both graduate students at the University of California at Berkeley when they met, were active in the civil rights movement. Shyamala Gopalan was an innovative scientist in her own right, coming to the United States in 1958 to attend UC Berkeley and work on her doctorate in endocrinology. She was greatly committed to civil rights, and her activism and research became tremendous influences that molded Harris's perception of social justice. Donald Harris was a serious economist whose work dealt with problems of economic inequality and development. He too was deeply involved in the civil rights movement, and his intellectual and political engagement greatly influenced Kamala's worldview. The couple divorced when Kamala was 7 years old, and she was raised primarily by her mother. Despite the separation, both parents were influential figures in her life. Shyamala chose to raise Kamala and her younger sister, Maya, in a primarily black neighborhood in Berkeley, well steeped in their African-American heritage. She often took her daughters along on marches for civil rights and instilled pride in them about their Indian and African-American heritage. Kamala Harris attended Thousand Oaks Elementary School in Berkeley, where she was part of the second class to integrate the public schools through busing. This early experience of racial integration and the civil rights movement, experienced as a child, marked her and deeply influenced her commitment to social justice. Following elementary school, Harris's mother accepted a position at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, and moved the family there when Kamala was 12 years old. She enrolled in Westmount High School in Montreal, where she excelled academically and showed an early interest in law and public service. She returned to the United States after high school and attended Howard University in Washington, D.C. Howard University, one of the best historically black institutions in America, played a primary role in Harris's development into a leader of the people. At Howard, Harris majored in political science and economics, was involved heavily with student government and debate, and became part of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, the oldest African-American sorority in the country. It was at Howard that her knowledge base regarding issues of social justice and public service was solidified. After Howard, Harris moved back to California and attended the University of California, Hastings College of the Law for her law degree. She received her Juris Doctor in 1989 and passed the California Bar in 1990 to begin her legal career. Kamala Harris launched her legal career as a deputy district attorney in Alameda County, California. She focused on prosecuting cases of violent crime, including child sexual assault, rape, and homicide. Her work in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office earned her a reputation as a tough, effective prosecutor who was committed to justice for the most vulnerable members of society. Harris joined the San Francisco District Attorney's Office in 1998, where she was assigned to lead the Career Criminal Unit. She was put in charge of prosecuting repeat offenders. Many of them were career criminals with quite a substantial history of crimes. Her work in the unit was characterized by her commitment to sending dangerous criminals to jail, yet at the same time, finding more creative solutions for crime reduction. Harris's work in San Francisco caught the eye of then District Attorney Terrence Hallinan, who in 2000 appointed her to lead the San Francisco City Attorney's Division on Families and Children. The division handled child support enforcement, represented victims of domestic violence, and handled cases of child abduction. Her work in this division expressed her ability to combine legal expertise with a deep commitment to social justice, further cementing her position as a rising star in the legal community. In 2003, Kamala Harris was the first to be elected to the position of District Attorney of San Francisco, an African-American and a female DA. She won her campaign on a reformist platform that anchored on a call for balanced law enforcement, with effective prosecution balanced by prevention and rehabilitation programs. As District Attorney, Harris implemented a number of new ideas that set her apart from all of her predecessors and garnered attention nationwide. Perhaps one of her most well-known programs was a plan called Back on Track, which would aid in preventing first-time nonviolent drug offenders from becoming repeat offenders. In lieu of prison time, Harris's program provided these offenders with the opportunity to engage in an 18-month rigorous program that included job training, education, and counseling. Those who finished it had charges dismissed and were able to restart life free from the stigma of a criminal conviction. The program received international accolades for the success it achieved in lowering recidivism and was thus used as a model for identical programs across the country. As DA, Harris strongly opposed the death penalty throughout her time in office. One of the most significant decisions she had to make as part of her job was when a police officer in San Francisco was killed in the line of duty shortly after she took office in 2004. Despite huge pressure from law enforcement and the public in general, Harris did not seek the death penalty for the officer's killer, standing her ground on her personal opposition to capital punishment. Her decision was highly contentious and received political backlash. At the same time, it earned her respect for such a principled stand on such a deeply divisive issue. In 2010, Kamala Harris was elected Attorney General of California, becoming the first woman, first African American, and first South Asian American to hold the post. Continuing her work in the Attorney General position, she continued building a well-deserved reputation for being a reform-minded official in areas such as criminal justice reform, consumer protection, and environmental justice. One of the biggest breaks during her time as Attorney General was her work on the national mortgage settlement in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. She helped secure for California homeowners a $20 billion settlement against the practices of some of the country's largest mortgage lenders. Her efforts brought much-needed relief to thousands of families facing foreclosure and cemented her reputation as a fierce advocate on behalf of consumers. She followed that with the creation of the Division of Recidivism Reduction and Reentry, charged with a reduction of the state prison population by providing support and resources for formerly incarcerated individuals. Her commitment to criminal justice reform shone in her addressing issues such as racial bias in the criminal justice system and the disproportionate impact of incarceration on communities of color. Kamala Harris plunged headfirst into politics from a successful career as a prosecutor. It wasn't until 2016 that she finally made that jump to national politics, when she ran to take over the U.S. Senate seat vacated by Barbara Boxer. Harris ran on a ticket, with the promise to champion criminal justice reform, healthcare, and immigration policies. The tough, practical leadership reputation she forged as a prosecutor and attorney general served her well with California voters. She won the election decisively to become the second African-American woman and first South Asian American to serve in the U.S. Senate. As a senator, Harris quickly established herself as a formidable presence. she was placed on several key committees, including the Judiciary Committee, in which she nationally gained recognition for razor-sharp questioning during high-profile hearings, including confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. It was her prosecutorial way of asking questions, plus her vast knowledge of the law, that eventually made her one of the striking figures in the Senate. Harris also served on the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, the Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Committee on Budget, further sealing her influence in Washington. The top legislative priorities during Harris's time in the Senate reflected her path toward justice and equality. She advocated legislation to reform criminal justice, such as the Justice in Policing Act, in hopes of reforming police brutality acts and systemic racism happening around the nation. She introduced legislation to protect the rights of immigrants, support working families, and expand access to health care. Such work on these issues won her a reputation as a progressive leader, though she often postures as a pragmatic problem solver who can bridge the divide between different factions of the Democratic Party. In January 2019, Harris announced her candidacy for the Democratic nomination for president in the 2020 election. Her campaign officially kicked off with a huge rally in Oakland, California, during which she struck themes of justice, equality, and unity. Harris would go on to swiftly ascend into top-tier candidate status, in large part after a standout performance in the first Democratic debate, where she called out Joe Biden for his past positions on busing and civil rights. It would be her focus on healthcare reform, women's rights, and gun control issues that defined her candidacy. Despite the early momentum, Harris's presidential campaign was racked by internal problems and an extremely crowded field of aspirants. She announced the suspension of her campaign in December 2019, owing to a lack of financial resources. However, with good debating skills and her good performance during the primaries, she managed to stay in the national spotlight. Harris's political career saw a historic turn when, in August 2020, the Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden chose her as running mate. She was thus the first African American and the first South Asian American woman to be nominated for vice president by a major party. Recently, following Joe Biden's exit from the presidential race, Kamala Harris has just gotten a shot at the United States presidency, which seems well-deserved, looking at her previous records. However, not everyone seems to be on this train, and among them is Katt Williams. So, what exactly are the reservations that Katt Williams has against Kamala Harris, despite her supposedly stellar records? Generally, the Black community has embraced her candidacy with some pretty complicated criticisms. Some of these reservations included her racial identity, her associations with influential figures, and her record as a prosecutor, which are sentiments that Katt shares. For some Black Americans, the number one issue at play is that of Kamala Harris's multi-ethnic background. She was born to an Indian mother and a Jamaican father. She identifies as Black and celebrates her African American heritage, but to some critics, her upbringing and experiences are not entirely consistent with that of most African Americans experiencing systemic racism. Part of this skepticism emanates from the feeling that she, no matter how diverse her background may be, cannot understand or represent the plight and needs peculiar to the Black community. Another source of concern for Katt has involved Harris's close connection with Willie Brown, the former mayor of San Francisco, and a powerful player in California politics. Brown was an early mentor to Harris. Their relationship, quickly proven to be as much personal as professional, has been attacked by detractors such as Katt Williams. This puts them in a position to argue that because she is close to Brown, as well as other political elites, her independence and ability to represent Black Americans at large are compromised. This has led many to speculate that her rise in politics is more a factor of connection than merit. Some of this has added fuel to the fire that she would preside more for the interests of the establishment than for the Black community. Some have even used her marriage to Douglas Emhoff, a white Jewish man, as a reason to question her connection to the Black community. Using that as a guideline, critics say this only further separates her from Black American experiences, and it begs questions about how seriously she'd take up issues that strike at their very core. This critique is highly contentious and represents a deeply entrenched concern of race and identity in America. It even more so ensures complicated dynamics around race, politics, and personal relationships. Perhaps the most paramount issue for those who criticize Harris is the record she has accumulated as a prosecutor and Attorney General of California. In office, she passed several strict on-crime policies that many argue were disproportionately aimed at Black and brown communities. Critics speak to her enablement of policies amounting to the mass incarceration of Black men, including how her office prosecuted cases of minor drug offenses and school truancy. Let's discuss more in the comments, and we will see you in the next one.